Ayanna Redbird was 23 years old when she finally realized she had spent more time wondering who she was than actually living as herself. She carried the blood of the Apache people, yet she had grown up far from the songs, drums, and sacred fires she barely remembered. While the world saw a quiet young woman with sharp eyes and sun-kissed skin, she felt like a misplaced leaf blown into the wrong forest. Her name sounded like it belonged to the wind, but her life felt borrowed, like a book without its first pages. She lived in a small, cold cabin at the edge of a mountain town in Montana, surrounded by pine trees that whispered even when the wind was still. Locals were mostly ranch families, hunters, retired soldiers, and men who spoke with their hands tucked in their pockets, not their hearts. Ayanna blended in with them on the outside. She dressed in denim, worked at the feed store, and rode an old second-hand horse when she needed quiet. But deep down, she knew their roots dug deep into white soil, while hers had been cut and replanted without permission. Her father, Jack Mendenhall, was the only person she shared a roof with while growing up. He was a former war veteran, though he never mentioned which war or how long he had been gone from home. His hands were steady, voice low, eyes unreadable, like someone who had seen too much but refused to speak before being asked. Jack taught her how to build a fire, skin a fish, survive winter storms, and track animals by broken twigs and faint prints. But he never taught her where she came from. Not once did he mention her mother, her tribe, or why her childhood memories of chanting voices and burning sage felt like half-remembered dreams. People in town would sometimes ask, "Where's your family from, girl?" And she would answer with a practiced shrug, "Just here and nowhere." Then they would nod politely, but their eyes lingered, trying to figure out why a girl with such a native-blooded face didn't speak of kin or land. There were moments when Ayanna caught herself staring at her reflection in the river near the cabin, hoping the water would reveal more than the mirror in her room ever could. She saw dark braided hair, almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, and yet none of it felt like something she owned. She often whispered into the wind, "Who are you?" as if her soul might answer from the other side of time. Jack was not cruel, but affection was foreign to him. He wasn't the kind of father who praised, comforted, or shared stories. When Ayanna cried as a child, he would hand her a blanket and say, "Warmth is better than tears." When she asked about her mother, he only tightened his jaw and said, "Some things don't help you survive." She learned not to push. In their home, silence was not empty. It was a rule. But inside her chest lived a noise she could never silence. The feeling of standing between two worlds and being welcomed by none. She wondered why she remembered the smell of ceremonial smoke, the warmth of painted hands touching her cheeks, and a lullaby in a language she was never taught. She wondered why no one ever called her by her Apache name, only the American one written on paper she never signed. As years passed, the unanswered questions grew heavier than winter snow, and though she had grown strong, something inside remained unfinished, like a drumbeat missing its last strike. One early autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted across the porch, Ayanna wiped dust from her boots and sat down with a cup of bitter coffee. It was one of those rare, quiet days when nothing seemed urgent. She thought maybe peace was finally settling in, until the old landline phone rang. She answered without much thought. "Miss Ayanna Redbird?" a formal male voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is the office of Attorney David Ortega. We need you to come in as soon as possible. It concerns a private legal matter left by your father." Ayanna froze, breath sharp, eyes wide. "My father?" "Yes, ma'am. And I must clarify. It's something he intended only for you. Please come tomorrow. It can't be delayed." The call ended. And right then, without warning, her quiet life, and everything she thought she knew, began to crack open. The next morning felt heavier than usual, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Ayanna arrived in town early, bundled in her faded denim jacket, boots scuffed from years of use and braids still damp with morning frost. She didn't know why, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Not from cold, but from a strange pull she couldn't name. The law office sat on the corner of Main Street, squeezed between an old barber shop and a saddle repair shop. The brass letters on the window spelled David Ortega and Associates. She hesitated at the door. Something inside whispered, "Whatever waits in there is not small." When she stepped inside, the warmth of the wood-burning stove didn't ease her nerves. Attorney Ortega, a man in his late 40s with dessert-colored skin and solemn eyes that seemed to recognize unspoken pain, greeted her with a gentle nod. "Miss Redbird," he said softly, motioning to the seat across from him, "thank you for coming so soon." She forced a small nod and sat. "You said this is about my father. What exactly happened?" Ortega folded his hands, choosing his words with the respect one uses when handling something fragile. "Your father, Mr. Jack Mendenhall, passed away 12 days ago. He left very specific instructions regarding his estate, and you are the only beneficiary named." Ayanna stared, unable to feel anything. Not sadness, not anger, only confusion. A silent storm trapped behind the ribs. "I didn't even know he owned anything worth mentioning," she said. "We barely scrape by most winters." "That may have been true," Ortega replied, "but he did own one property, a restricted parcel located on a private island in Glacial Lake, north of here. The entire location is classified as off-record. Only your father, myself, and now you are aware." Ayanna blinked slowly, as if the words came from a language she hadn't learned yet. "An island?" "Yes," he confirmed. "A piece of land completely isolated, registered under a sealed agreement. According to his final statement, it is yours. But there is a condition." He opened a thick brown folder and slid a document toward her. The heading read, "Confidential, Personal Assignment, Notarized Directive." She felt her throat tighten. "What kind of condition?" "You must travel to the island alone and claim the property within 30 days. Once your presence is recorded on site, through a key-sealed registry box, ownership will become permanent. If you do not go," he paused, his eyes meeting hers, "the land will be surrendered back to federal holding and erased from public record." Ayanna leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. 30 days, alone, to a place she never even knew existed. "What kind of place is it?" she asked. "I cannot tell you," Ortega replied. "Your father requested no descriptions, no explanations, no photos, no guidance." He hesitated, then added quietly, "He insisted you would understand everything once you arrived." Ayanna felt a brief, sharp rage, the same burning question echoing inside her since childhood. Why was he always a man of secrets? Why speak only when silence hurt the most? Ortega then placed a small black velvet pouch on the table. "This was also left for you. He said you would recognize its meaning." Her fingers moved slowly, as if afraid the object might burn. She opened the pouch and pulled out a silver key. Old, heavy, hand-forged, carved with a feather symbol that shimmered like moonlight. An eagle feather. A sacred Apache emblem. A marker of ancestry, identity, truth. She felt her breath break for a second. This was not a random relic. This was a message from a man who never knew how to speak. Half fear, half destiny. Ortega watched her reaction quietly, then spoke his final sentence with a tone that held more understanding than any stranger should have. "Whatever lies on that island, your father did not leave it there by accident." Ayanna closed her hand around the key. It felt too heavy for silver, as if it carried every missing piece of her story. "I'll go," she whispered, "not because of land, not because of inheritance, but because this was the closest she had ever been to finding out who she truly was. And that answer was worth more than anything money could ever buy." 2 mornings later, before the first hint of daylight touched the mountain ridge, Ayanna packed everything she believed she might need, though she had no idea what kind of destination awaited her. Into her weathered canvas backpack, she placed a canteen, dried meat, a small hunting knife, a match tin, and an old notebook filled with questions she had never been able to ask. The last thing she tucked in, with slow and reverent hands, was a hand-woven Apache blanket, stitched long ago with red, black, and earth-brown patterns. The only item she still possessed from the life before her memories turned hazy. She paused for a long time before stepping outside her cabin, unsure if she was walking away from her life or toward it. The air outside was crisp, sharp, and smelled like pine smoke from distant chimneys. Snow lingered across the fields, not enough to bury the world, but enough to make every footstep sound lonely. Ayanna saddled her mare and began riding north, following a dirt road carved through evergreen trees and granite slopes. The farther she traveled, the wilder the land became, as if civilization had been left behind like a forgotten whisper. Mountains rose like ancient guardians, their cliffs scarred by storms older than human memory. Streams ran with ice-cold water, clear as polished glass, winding between fallen logs and boulders. Even the wind seemed different, not cold, not hostile, but watching. Hours passed in silence except for the sound of hooves crunching through patches of thin snow and melting frost. She dismounted when the trail narrowed, leading her through tall pine woods where the trunks stood straight as soldiers and the branches creaked like muted voices. Every once in a while, she glanced at the silver key tied around her neck with leather cord, the eagle feather engraving shining faintly under weak sunlight. At dusk, she reached the northern shore of the massive glacial lake mentioned in the legal documents. The lake stretched wide, still, and strangely untouched, as if no one had dared disturb its surface for decades. The water reflected the sky like a mirror of steel. There was no pier, no signpost, no cabin nearby, yet she was expected. Tied to an old stump near the water's edge was a hand-carved wooden canoe, coated with resin and decorated with Apache symbols, spirals, arrows, and a single thunderbird etched on the bow. Her breath caught in her chest. This canoe was not new. It had been shaped with care, sanded smooth by hand, not factory production. Whoever left it had known she was coming long before she made her decision. Ayana placed her hand on its surface. It was cold but solid, like a promise that had waited too long. After securing her pack, she pushed the canoe into the water. The lake was so quiet that even the ripples sounded like secrets. She grabbed the oar and began to paddle, each stroke slow and steady. The world around her faded, not darker, not quieter, but otherworldly. Halfway across, a strange sensation washed over her. She heard drums, not loud, faint, distant, like heartbeat echoes hidden beneath the water. Then came a woman's voice humming a ceremonial tune, one she didn't consciously remember, yet somehow knew. Her grip tightened on the paddle. Her breath trembled. Tears pricked her eyes without permission. She whispered into the empty air, "Is that you, Mother?" The wind answered with a soft, sorrowful whistle. Mist thickened across the lake, rolling low and white like spirit fog, wrapping her canoe in silence. The drums faded, leaving only the sound of her oar slicing through water, but their rhythm remained carved inside her chest. As the canoe drifted farther, a dark silhouette emerged ahead. Not a mountain, not a cliff, but an island rising from the fog, covered with towering pines and dead silent stillness. No birds called, no smoke rose, no footprints marked the shore. It looked abandoned, but it didn't feel abandoned. Ayana exhaled, her voice shaking as she whispered, "I'm here." And whether it was fear, destiny, or blood calling her home, the island answered by simply waiting. The canoe scraped gently against the pebbled shore, and Ayana stepped out, boots sinking into damp earth that smelled of pine sap and cold stone. The island was silent, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but alert, like something ancient was listening. Tall pines stood like watchmen around her, branches shifting with slow breaths of wind. For a moment she hesitated, feeling the weight of unseen eyes, but then she followed a faint dirt path leading deeper into the trees. The trail twisted through the woods, narrow and overgrown, as if it had not been walked for many years. Yet it was not wild. Someone had once shaped it, and time hadn't fully reclaimed it. The deeper she moved, the more her chest tightened. She couldn't tell if she was trespassing or returning. After several minutes, the forest opened to a small clearing, and there it stood. A wooden lodge, weather-worn, moss along the roof edges, window frames faded, but otherwise untouched. No broken glass, no forced doors, no graffiti. It looked preserved, not abandoned, like a memory that refused to rot. Ayana approached slowly. There were no footprints, no smoke, no movement. Yet the lodge held an energy that made her skin prickle. The door was shut, but when she pushed it, the hinges groaned softly. Not in protest, but as though greeting someone expected long ago. Inside, the air was cool and still, yet layered with the distinct scent of sage. Not accidental, but ceremonial. The smell brought a shiver through her bones. Her people burned sage to protect, to cleanse, to honor spirits. But here, she felt it was used to preserve something. The cabin interior was simple but sturdy. A stone fireplace, a table carved by hand, shelves of jars filled with herbs. On one wall hung a buffalo hide, painted with symbols she didn't fully understand anymore. She had been too young when the teachings were taken from her. Her hands shook slightly as she walked deeper inside. She noticed dust in some places, but other areas, a chair, the mantle, and a wooden chest, were wiped clean as if someone had tended them recently. She whispered to herself, who lived here, and who wanted this place to stay alive? On a dresser near the window, something caught her eye. A set of photographs tucked inside a cracked wooden frame. She lifted it carefully, brushing dust from the glass, and then froze as the image came into focus. Her father, younger, smiling faintly, wearing clothing she'd never seen him in, stood with a native woman with deep brown skin and traditional Apache dress. In front of them, nestled between their arms, was a young girl, no older than 5 or 6, with braided hair and striking almond-shaped eyes. Eyes that mirrored Ayana's, eyes that belonged to her blood. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her fingertips. That's not the woman he raised me with. That's not my mother. The truth hit like a sudden gunshot in an empty canyon. The mother she remembered was not the woman who bore her. Breath shaking, she searched the cabin for more answers. Her fingers trailed across shelves, carved beams, and keepsakes until she reached the far wall, a place half shadowed by the dim light filtering through the window. There, stretched across the wooden planks, was a painted Apache symbol, crude and rushed, not ceremonial but emotional. It depicted a human figure split into 2 halves, one side painted with tribal markings, the other side blank, torn from its cultural identity. Beneath it, drawn in red ochre, was another symbol meaning a spirit separated from its people. Ayana stepped back, pulse racing, her voice barely audible. That's me. The knowledge didn't feel like discovery. It felt like recognition. Nothing in this lodge was random. Nothing here was left by accident. This place wasn't built to be forgotten. It was built to remember what had been stolen. And for the first time in her life, Ayana realized she hadn't come to the island to claim something. She had come to face what had been taken. For several minutes, Ayana stood motionless beneath the painted symbol, her heartbeat thudding like distant war drums. The silence inside the lodge felt heavier now, as if the air itself carried memories that refused to sleep. She forced herself to breathe, slow and deep, before turning her attention back to the room. Something told her there was still more. Something hidden, intentionally sealed away. And then she noticed it. On the left side of the lodge, partially concealed behind a hanging buffalo hide, was a narrow wooden door, no larger than a closet, its edges reinforced with iron bands. Dust coated the frame, but unlike the rest of the lodge, this door bore a keyhole shaped like a small feather, the same shape engraved on her silver key. Her hand instinctively reached for the key around her neck. She hesitated only once. Then she slid it in. The lock gave way with a soft click, not stubborn or rusty, almost as if it had been waiting. The door swung open to reveal a small hidden room, no bigger than a child's sleeping space. The air inside was colder, but not stale. It smelled of animal hide, cedar wood, and smoked herbs. A faint ray of daylight slipped through a tiny window, revealing a collection of items that did not belong to her father's life, but to the life he took her from. On the floor lay a handmade animal hide doll, its face stitched with careful detail, adorned with tiny beads and corn husk hair, braided like a young child would wear. Beside it hung a dream catcher, its feathers faded with age but still intact. The weaving pattern unmistakably Apache, the style used for children to ward off nightmares. Folded neatly in a cedar chest was a small woven blanket, similar in color and pattern to the one Ayana carried from childhood, but this one was much smaller, meant for someone half her size. She lifted it with trembling fingers, pressing it against her cheek, and suddenly her eyes stung. Somewhere deep inside, an old warmth flickered. A warmth she hadn't felt since she was too young to understand why. Next to the blanket sat a medicine pouch, filled with crushed sage, dried sweetgrass, blue corn seeds, and red ochre, sacred items for prayer and protection. She opened it slowly, half expecting to smell her mother's touch. That's when she found the leather-bound notebook, thin, frayed at the edges, tied with rawhide string. With a breath that felt like stepping across a line she could never return from, she loosened the knot and opened it. The handwriting inside was uneven, shaken, and ink-blotted, as though written in fear, regret, or both. The first sentence shattered her knees. "If the day ever comes when you find this place, please, my child, forgive me." Her father's voice echoed in her head, not from memory, but from ink, and the pain behind the words seeped like blood. She continued reading, flipping page after page. "I did what I thought would save you. Some truths cost more than I could bear. I chose silence because every other choice felt like death." Her hands tightened around the notebook. Save her from what? Silence about who? Death to whom? She searched desperately for answers, but each page repeated the same two phrases: to protect and to keep hidden. But protect what? And hide from who? There were letters too. Dozens folded but never sent, addressed only to "my little one." She read fragments, voice trembling. "I see your mother's eyes when I sleep. Forgive the man I became. One day I pray the spirits guide you back." Tears finally escaped her eyes, falling silently onto the open pages. She had waited her whole life for answers. Instead, she found more shadows. And then, just as she wiped her face with her sleeve, the floorboards above her creaked. Her breath stopped. The room was small, still, unmoving, but the sound was unmistakable. Light footsteps, quick, playful, like a child running across the wooden floor above her head. Ayanna slowly lifted her gaze toward the ceiling, eyes wide, pulse racing. There was no wind, no animals, no people. Yet the footsteps continued. Pat, 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 before stopping abruptly, as if something or someone suddenly realized they were no longer alone. And in that chilling, breathless silence, Ayanna understood. Some secrets weren't hidden. They were still here. Ayanna sat on the floor of the small hidden room long after the footsteps faded, the notebook still open in her lap. It felt as though the walls were closing in, not to trap her, but to force her to face every unanswered question she had buried since childhood. With trembling breath, she wiped her tears and turned another fragile page. The next entry contained a name written in slow, almost reverent strokes. Violet Morningstar. The ink beneath it swirled into a brief description. "Your mother, Apache-born, the bravest soul I ever knew." Ayanna whispered the name aloud, letting it roll off her tongue like a forgotten prayer. Violet Morningstar. It felt familiar, not like a memory, but like a song she had once known before sleep stole it away. The notebook continued. "She carried fire in her voice and thunder in her heartbeat. She sang you into this world with ancestral blessing. She taught you to feel the earth beneath your feet, long before you learned to walk." Ayanna pressed a hand to her chest as if trying to steady her heart. All her life, she thought the woman who raised her briefly before disappearing was her birth mother. A quiet, pale-faced woman who never looked like her, never spoke of heritage, never offered warmth. Now she understood why their connection never felt like blood. She read further, voice cracking as she spoke the words. "Your mother's people lived free, just like their ancestors, until government officers began taking native children to boarding schools, far from their families, to break their spirit, language, and identity." The sentence hit like a hammer. Ayanna knew of such histories, whispered in documentaries, never in textbooks. But she had never imagined she had been one of the hunted. Her hands shook harder as she read. "They came for children with tribal blood. Violet feared you would be taken, that you would lose your language, your songs, your spirit. She begged me to protect you. I didn't know how." Ayanna felt her stomach twist. So that was the monster that chased her childhood. Not a man, not a curse, but a system built to erase her existence. The next lines were smeared as if ink mixed with tears long before hers. "We ran. We hid. But fear chewed us alive. Violet believed the spirits would protect you if you stayed close to your tribe. I believed the world outside would destroy you if they found you." It was then she understood. Her parents did not abandon her out of coldness. They were torn apart by different ways of loving. She flipped to the final page, almost afraid of what she would find. But she forced herself. She needed closure, not comfort. There in the center of the page, written with deliberate force, were the words that would both break her and build her. "I chose the cruelest path because I believed it was the safest. Taking you away meant breaking your mother's heart and my own. But if it meant you could live, I bore it. even if you hated me forever. And below it, the final sentence. I chose the harshest way to keep you safe. Ayana shut the notebook and covered her face with her hands. She wasn't crying only because of the pain. She was crying because of the impossible choice no parent should ever have to make. She cried for a mother who sang against fate, for a father who hid behind silence, and for a child caught between worlds with no map to follow. The flames in the fireplace flickered faintly, as if moved by unseen breath. The silver key resting against her chest felt heavier now. No longer just a tool, but a piece of her soul returned. When she finally rose, her legs were weak, but her spirit felt sharper than before. She understood something vital. She was not abandoned. She was protected at a brutal cost. And now she had survived long enough to learn why. No matter how much it hurt, the truth belonged to her now. With the notebook pressed to her heart, she whispered into the stillness, I forgive you, Father, but I won't stop until I know everything. And for the first time, she wasn't speaking as a broken child, but as a woman reclaiming her identity. The night outside had grown heavier, pressing cold against the wooden walls, but Ayana no longer felt fear, only purpose. She wiped her face, steadied her breathing, and turned back to the small chest where she had found the notebook. Something inside her insisted there was still one more truth hidden beneath the sorrow. She dug deeper, pulling out folded papers tied with a strip of red wool, the same color used in Apache fire dance ceremonies. The wool had faded, but the knot was tight, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She untied it carefully, knowing this was not merely stored information, but protected memory. Inside were letters, each addressed to a single name. Rosa Morningstar, Tacoma, Washington. The name hit her like a cold wind. Morningstar, the same surname as her mother. But the first word, Rosa, woke a distant echo. She remembered the old photograph she found earlier. A young girl with warm copper skin, thick braids, and eyes that gleamed like the reflection of sunlight on river water. Eyes that looked like hers. She grabbed the photograph from the table and turned it to the back. Her breath caught as she read the tiny handwriting. Rosa, 6 years old. Keep her safe. Keep them apart until the danger passes. Not keep her away, but keep her safe. Ayana stared at the letters again and whispered, Rosa isn't just someone my parents knew. She's my sister. Half-sister by blood, full sister by fate. She unfolded the first letter and scanned through short, emotional paragraphs written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. The words trembled like someone speaking from a burning edge of regret. Rosa is fiery like her mother. She can survive anywhere. I pray she never finds us until it's safe. One day when the world is kinder, bring them together. Ayana pressed a palm to her forehead. He didn't hide me because I was alone. He hid me because I wasn't. She continued reading, flipping through envelope after envelope, all unsent, all dated years apart, all filled with updates about her life as she grew. First day of school, her struggle with identity, her nightmares, her loneliness, her silence. He wrote to Rosa as if Rosa already loved Ayana, as if someday she would read every word and understand how hard he tried to carry the burden alone. Near the bottom of the stack, she found a folded newspaper clipping, tucked between letters like a wound no one dared to reopen. She unfolded it and felt her chest tighten. Local woman disappears in mountain forest. No body found, published October 2008. There, beneath the bold headline, was her mother's name, Violet Morningstar. The article stated she vanished while gathering herbs used in ceremonial healing, leaving behind no signs of injury or struggle. Authorities suspected either exposure to elements or an animal attack. Search efforts were eventually abandoned. Ayana stared at the last line. Some members of the tribe believed she simply walked into the spirit world. She sat slowly, her pulse loud in her ears. People didn't just vanish, not without reason, not without choice. And then the thought struck her. Sharp, unreasonable, but alive. What if she didn't die? What if she hid, just like her father did, but from something even darker? What if she's still out there, somewhere the modern world cannot reach? Ayana looked around the tiny room, the sage, the woven blankets, the ceremonial tools. The lodge wasn't only a place of exile, it was a safe house, a bridge between two worlds. She whispered, Mother, are you still breathing the same wind I do? For the first time since arriving, she stood tall, not as a lost girl, but as a woman refusing to let history decide her future. She folded the letters carefully, packed the photograph, and whispered with steady conviction, "I will find her, but first I have to find Rosa." There was no map, no instruction, no promise, only a trail marked by blood, fire, and silence. But for someone born between worlds, that was more than enough. It took 2 days of travel, a long bus ride through fog-covered highways, and one cold walk across Tacoma's historic district before Ayanna finally stopped in front of a small, cedar-front shop with a hand-painted sign, "Morningstar Crafts, handmade Apache goods." The wooden chimes outside sang with the wind, made from deer bone and river stone, producing a haunting yet comforting sound. A sound that felt like home even though she had never heard it before. Ayanna tightened her grip on the silver key hanging around her neck, swallowed her nerves, and pushed open the door. The familiar smell of sage, smoked cedar, and earth pigment rushed over her like a wave, almost making her knees buckle. Inside, shelves were lined with beadwork, feather earrings, medicine pouches, buckskin dolls, and hand-stitched blankets dyed with natural clay colors. A woman stood behind the counter, threading beads into a bracelet with precise, experienced fingers. She looked to be in her early 30s. Long black hair in 2 braids, copper-toned skin, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that burned like fire against night sky. The resemblance was immediate, so striking it felt like looking into a future version of herself. Ayanna whispered, barely audible, "Rosa?" The woman didn't look up. "Do I know you?" Ayanna stepped forward, voice trembling. "My name is Ayanna Redbird, and I think we're related." Rosa's fingers froze mid-thread. She slowly lifted her head, and for a moment, just one, her eyes softened, as if recognizing something ancient. Then her expression hardened like stone. "Who sent you?" she asked sharply. "No one. I found letters. Letters addressed to you, left by Jack Mendenhall." The name struck like a match thrown into gasoline. Rosa's chair screeched backward as she shot to her feet, fury shaking her voice. "Don't you ever speak that man's name in here?" Customers in the back glanced over, sensing tension, then quietly slipped out the door. Ayanna felt her heart race, but stood her ground. "He was my father," she said quietly. "Your father," Rosa repeated, disgust twisting every syllable. "He was your father, not mine." She paced, breath uneven, then turned with fire in her eyes. "He took you, stole you like some government officer in a suit, dragged you away from our mother, from our tribe, from our ancestors. You have any idea what that did to her?" Ayanna's voice cracked. "I never knew the truth." "That's convenient," Rosa snapped. "Meanwhile, our mother searched for you until her spirit nearly broke." Ayanna felt like the walls were closing in. "I didn't choose any of this, Rosa." Rosa slammed her palm against the counter. "No, but you benefited from it. You got safety. You got warmth. You got a home. And what did we get? A ghost story with no ending." Silence swallowed the room until it became unbearable. Finally, Ayanna whispered, "I thought I was abandoned. I thought no one wanted me." Rosa stopped moving. Something in her hardened anger cracked, just slightly like ice under sunlight. Their eyes met, and for the first time, they both saw the same grief, wearing 2 different faces. Rosa spoke again, her tone lower, slower, pained. "You really don't remember anything? Not a face? A voice? A song?" Ayanna shook her head, tears rising. "All I ever felt was that I never belonged anywhere." Rosa lowered her gaze, shoulders trembling. "That place you came from," she said hollowly. "That island, it's cursed with sorrow, a place where love went to die. I'm not going back there. Not ever." Ayanna stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't come to force you. I came because I don't want to carry this alone anymore." At that, Rosa's eyes filled, not with rage, but years of unshed tears. She didn't welcome Ayanna. She didn't reject her. Instead, she whispered like someone touching a wound still bleeding, "You and I, we are the same storm. That's what hurts." And though no embrace followed, something did. A fragile truce born from shared scars. The canoe's bow sliced through the still black water as dawn crept over the horizon, smearing faint gold across the cold Montana sky. The fog that forever guarded the island drifted low and silent, like spirits watching from another realm. This time, Ayanna returned alone. Not as a confused intruder, but as someone who understood why the land existed and why it had waited for her. When the canoe scraped against the rocky shore, She stepped out and inhaled slowly. The air tasted different now. Not bitter, not frightening, but deeply familiar. This place was no longer the island her father hid, but the ground that held her roots. Inside the old lodge, everything remained untouched. The folded blankets, the quiet walls, the faint scent of sage that clung to the wooden beams. She set down her pack and carefully placed 3 items on the floor. A bundle of sage, her mother's dream catcher, and a small hide pouch filled with red ceremonial powder. She whispered, "I'm ready." Outside, she gathered dry wood near the fire pit. Pine, cedar, and a small piece of juniper, the way tribal elders once taught in stories she never realized were meant for her. She knelt, struck flint, and watched as a small flame sparked to life, slowly growing into a steady, calm fire. She lit the sage, letting smoke curl around her hands and drift into the sky. The scent carried warmth, memory, and permission. Then she lifted the dream catcher, woven with buckskin and tiny turquoise beads, and hung it on the lodge door so it gently swayed in the early morning wind. Finally, she dipped her fingers into the red powder, the same shade used for ancient blessings, and sprinkled it in a slow circular motion around the fire, whispering the words that had slept inside her heart since childhood. Ashley Dahaju, let there be healing. Her next task was the hardest. She pulled out her father's letters, the ones filled with pain, fear, and silent love. She had expected to burn them, to release them into smoke the way many tribal rituals taught. But instead, she found herself kneeling beside the earth behind the lodge. She dug with her bare hands, cold soil staining her palms until a small hollow lay at her knees. There she placed the letters, every page, every aching word, and covered them gently. Not destroyed, return. I don't need to erase you, she whispered. I just needed to understand you. As she pressed the final handful of dirt over the letters, a wind rose from the trees, soft and swirling. Not harsh, not wild, but tender. The sage smoke bent into its current, spiraling upward as if carried by invisible hands. For just a second, she saw a silhouette beyond the tree line. The shape of a man standing tall, shoulders broad, face unreadable, but peaceful. His outlines shimmered, blending with pine needles, wind, and sunlight. She did not scream. She did not run. She simply bowed her head and whispered, I forgive you, Father. The silhouette dissolved into the wind, and the forest seemed to exhale, relieved. Ayana wiped her tears, ready to stand alone, until she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, hesitant, familiar. She turned. Rosa stood there, breathing heavily, as if she had run through every mile of doubt she ever carried. Her eyes glistened, not with anger, but with surrender to truth she could no longer fight. Without speaking, she walked forward and placed a steady hand on Ayana's shoulder. Her touch was warm, grounding, the kind that said, I am your family, whether I understand everything or not. Her voice was low, scratchy with emotion. This house, it isn't a prison anymore. She looked toward the sky, letting smoke brush her face. It won't hold sorrow now, not if we choose differently. From this moment, it's a beginning. Ayana felt her breath hitch. She wasn't alone, not anymore. 2 daughters, one raised by silence, one raised by longing, stood on sacred ground, no longer separated by fear or history, but bound by the choice to heal. And the island, once cold and secretive, finally felt alive. Spring arrived slowly on the island, as if the land itself needed time to trust warmth again. Snow melted into clear streams running down the rocks. Pine branches shook free of frost, and sunlight filtered through the trees in thin, golden strands. For the first time since anyone could remember, the island no longer felt haunted. It felt awake. Ayana and Rosa stood side by side outside the lodge, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, boots caked with dirt. They hammered wood, scrubbed beams, repaired the stone foundation, and opened every shutter to let sunlight and spirit back in. They kept every Apache-made item exactly where it belonged. Not as relics of pain, but as roots finally honored. The lodge slowly transformed, not into a tourist retreat, not into a private inheritance, but into a sanctuary for those who had been severed from their identity, their families, their history, or their voice. They placed soft blankets, ceremonial drums, cedar mats, and baskets filled with sage, sweetgrass, and red earth. What once looked like a hidden bunker now became a place where broken lineage could breathe again. Outside, they hung wind chimes made from river stones and arrowheads, letting the breeze carry songs no school, no government, no threat could ever silence. Then on a smooth plank of carved cedar, they painted 4 words in Apache syllables. Not just a welcome sign, but a promise. Nishi Hujo, where the spirit finds its way home. The sign was hung above the door like a blessing. When the final nail was tapped into place, both sisters stepped back and stared at it, warmth rising behind their eyes. It wasn't perfect, but neither were they. And somehow that became the truest medicine. Soon word traveled, slowly at first, carried by whispers through native communities. No posters, no ads, no online campaigns. Just stories. Stories of a cabin in the mountains, tended by 2 sisters with fire blood, offering a place to sit, breathe, weep, reclaim, and rise. The first visitors were hesitant. A young man who'd been adopted into a city life that never spoke of where he came from. An older woman who once hid her tribal name to survive. A teenager who felt disconnected from everything except the sound of drums she had only heard in dreams. One arrival at a time, the cabin warmed. Stories were spoken, songs were sung, silence was respected, and identity, no matter how broken, was never judged. Ayana watched it all with a quiet heart, knowing that once she too had come here lost, with holes in her past and ghosts in her soul. Now she stood with both feet planted, not between worlds anymore, but belonging to both. Rosa noticed the change in her and smiled one dusk as they stood together at the water's edge. The lake reflected orange sky, and loons called in the distance. The land breathing, healed. "You know," Rosa said softly, "I spent years thinking everything ended because of that place." Ayana turned to her. "And now?" Rosa exhaled slowly, eyes glistening. "Now I see it's where everything begins." They linked arms, not because they had to, not because they were afraid, but because they finally could. The wind picked up gently, carrying sage-scented air through the trees, rustling the sign above the lodge. For a moment, it sounded like laughter, the kind that belongs to ancestors who finally found peace. Ayana looked toward the door, toward the sanctuary they had built not from inheritance, but from choice, and spoke the words that would forever define their legacy. Blood is not what makes a family. It's the people who choose to stay and heal together.